I didn't cry at the airport. Not when she kissed me on the cheek like I was her brother. Not when she held up her hand to flash the little silver promise ring I gave her last spring, the same one she now wore like a trophy, not a vow. And certainly not when I turned away, boarding a one-way flight she thought was round trip. See, I had planned a future, the kind with passports worn out from honeymoon cities, with a ring box nestled in my coat pocket, real velvet, real gold, real intention. But instead, I watched her run towards someone else's camera, someone else's car, someone else's version of love. She thought I'd come back after a few months abroad. She thought I was still waiting. What she didn't know was, that ring in my pocket. I threw it into the ocean the moment the wheels lifted off the tarmac, and I carried nothing back but silence. I gave her the promise ring on a rooftop just past midnight. The city glimmered below us like it was holding its breath. We sat on a blanket, half-finished takeout between us, the scent of soy sauce tangled in the wind. Her fingers were cold, but they wrapped around mine like they'd never let go. "I don't need a real one yet," she whispered, voice trembling like the teacup beside her. "Just this. A promise." So I slid the silver band onto her finger, and she smiled. Not for the camera, not for an audience, but for me. That night, her smile was soft, a little crooked, completely unpolished. The kind that makes you believe you're home even when the stars are falling apart above you. I remember how she leaned her head on my shoulder, how our silence felt full instead of empty. But silence changes too. It was subtle at first, a different gloss on her lips, a new tilt to her head in photos. Her laughter grew sharper, like she was chasing a sound she no longer recognized. She started saying content instead of memories. Engagement meant numbers, not intimacy. And still, I held on. Because love, I thought, was meant to adapt. To stretch with the seasons and shift with the light. Until even the light started lying to me. One afternoon, weeks later, we sat on that same rooftop. She was dressed differently, too perfect for an ordinary day. Her phone was angled on a tripod, the skyline behind her. Just capturing the sunset, she said. But she was turned toward the lens, not me. When she smiled this time, I wasn't in it. I watched from beside her, and for the first time, I saw what others saw, a girl radiant with ambition, glowing with something I couldn't quite reach. She posted a picture that night. The caption read, "Dreams, rings, and rooftop lights." No mention of my name, not even a tag. I didn't say anything, just scrolled through the comments. Heart. Emojis, fire emojis, strangers gushing over her man of mystery. I stared at the silver promise ring on her finger, the one I gave her while my heart was beating louder than the traffic below us that night. It gleamed brighter under stage lights than it ever did in moonlight. Her friends started changing too, names I never knew, voices that echoed off her phone before she slept. Influencers, collaborators, people who called me the quiet one behind grins too wide. She began mimicking their speech, their jokes, rehearsing her smile in front of bathroom mirrors. One night, I walked in on her doing it, tilting her face, laughing at nothing, eyes calculating the right angle. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just said, "I have to get this right, you know how it is." But I didn't, not anymore. We used to laugh at that kind of thing, now she was that kind of thing. I still kissed her before bed, still made her coffee exactly the way she liked it. Almond milk, cinnamon, 2 cubes of sugar. But when I handed her the cup one morning, her fingers brushed mine like I was just in the way. And when I leaned in to kiss her, she didn't even look up from her screen. That's when I realized, she hadn't let go of me, she had just replaced me with the idea of me. Her fingers still wore my promise, but her heart had already moved into another version of herself, one I couldn't follow. A few days later, I caught her staring at the ring, not with nostalgia, not with love, but like it was a prop, a product, a post. "I should do a video about it," she said absently, tapping the band. "The story behind the ring, that would get views." She didn't notice how my breath stopped. Didn't see how my hands curled into fists behind my back. I wanted to scream, that ring was never content, that night was never scripted. That rooftop held more truth than any of your filters ever will. But I didn't. I just nodded. Because I wasn't ready to let go yet. Because sometimes, love makes you quiet when you should be loud. Later that evening, I went back to the rooftop alone. The blanket was still there, weather-faded and crumpled in the corner. The city pulsed beneath me, indifferent. I looked up, hoping for stars. There were none. Only the dull orange of city lights and a silence that didn't feel full anymore. That's when I knew, her smile had changed, but so had mine, and we were both pretending we hadn't noticed. The photo went up at 8:47 p.m. I remember the exact minute because my phone buzzed so violently it fell off the kitchen counter. I was standing there in the same grey hoodie I wore the night I bought the ring, sleeves fraying, the fabric still faintly smelling of her perfume from when she hugged me after dinner. The screen lit up, and there it was. Promise ring reveal. So grateful for this new chapter, no name, no face beside her, just her hand stretched out like it belonged to the world now. The ring, silver and modest, gleaming against the sunset light, the same rooftop sunset I thought was ours. Within minutes, the post exploded. Thousands of likes, heart emojis, comments from strangers asking for the brand, assuming it was part of a collab. I scrolled through them all, holding my breath like I was waiting for something, some tag, some hidden credit, even a subtle nod that said, "He gave this to me." But there was nothing. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was just the guy behind the product shot. I stood in our apartment, a pot of pasta still boiling behind me, watching her digital life unfold without me. She was in the next room, laughing into her phone, replying to comments, screenshotting DMs, her voice lifting in practiced surprise every time a new message came in. I walked in slowly, holding my phone up, showing her the post. "You didn't mention me." She glanced at it, then at me, brushing her curled hair behind her ear with the same hand that wore the ring. "Oh, babe, don't overthink it. It's just marketing." "Marketing," I repeated. She kissed me on the cheek like a pat on the head. "People like mystery. It boosts engagement. If they think it's part of a campaign, it performs better. I'll mention you later, okay?" But she never did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed while she curled under the covers, still scrolling through congratulatory comments. Her eyes reflected her phone screen like a mirror, glowing with every like, every praise, every assumption that the ring came from some faceless brand deal or a boyfriend more camera-friendly than me. And maybe that's what I was to her now. Inconvenient lighting. I thought about how she used to lean on my shoulder at midnight, barefoot in the kitchen, whispering ideas to me, with her face half asleep. Now she ran her ideas by sponsors first. She called me her anchor when the storms got loud, but all I felt was heavy. A week later, she uploaded a YouTube short, a soft montage, her opening the ring box, gasping, hugging the air, scripted expressions that felt almost genuine, piano music, warm filters, no sign of me. The comments overflowed with strangers saying, "I hope he treats you right," and "Whoever gave you that is lucky." One girl said, "Manifesting a love like this," and I nearly laughed. Because if they saw what love looked like on the other side of the lens, if they saw the silence in our kitchen, the distance in our shared bed, the way she looked at the ring but not the hands that gave it, they wouldn't want this kind of love, they wouldn't manifest it. I confronted her again after that video hit 500,000 views. We were sitting at a cafe we used to love, one she picked because it matched her aesthetic. Her coffee was untouched, but her phone was alive, eyes flicking back and forth as she tracked the numbers like stock. "I feel like I'm being erased," I said quietly. She looked up. "What are you talking about? I gave you that ring because it meant something, because you meant something, and now it's just content." She tilted her head, expression unreadable. "It's still the same ring, isn't it? Still on my finger. That's not the part that hurts." Her jaw tightened slightly, then softened into that public smile she'd perfected. "You're taking this too personally. Everything's part of the image now. You know how this works." But I didn't, not like this. When we started, it wasn't about image, it was about the way her fingers trembled when I first held them, the way she looked at me like I was the only real thing in a world full of curated noise. Now, I was the silence behind her signal. I paid for the ring with 2 freelance jobs and 3 weeks of skipped meals. She wore it like a brand partnership. And maybe the worst part was, I still loved her. Even as she slowly turned me into a ghost. That night, I opened my sketchbook, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. I drew her hand, not the way it looked in the photo, but how it looked that night on the rooftop, trembling slightly as I slid the band on. Then I drew mine next to it, open, empty, like the kind of love that's never seen but always used. The sketch was quiet, but it spoke everything I couldn't say. I tore the page out and tucked it into my drawer. Because someday, when she asks why I stopped trying, I'll hand her that drawing and let her see what I became in her spotlight. A shadow. It was 2:13 a.m. when the final echo of her laughter clicked off the screen. I watched from the hallway, the glow of her ring light leaking through the cracks of the door. She had just finished a relationship QA livestream. Without me. The comments were filled with assumptions. Manifesting a man like hers. She's glowing, must be in love. Is she even dating anyone? And she let them guess. She smiled, teased, tilted her head as if the very idea of being taken was negotiable. She giggled at one comment. Bet he's rich or imaginary. Then she winked. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt before, like a placeholder in a story I didn't write. I walked back to my desk, that ache in my ribs pulsing like a second heartbeat. My sketchbook sat open, pages filled with her. Not the digital version of her the world loved, but the real one, the one who once danced barefoot in puddles. The one who cried when she thought I was asleep. I flipped to the last page I'd drawn, her silhouette under the yellow streetlight outside our apartment, her shoulders curled inward, fragile. That girl hadn't looked at me in months. With a quiet breath, I clicked open the residency application. 6 months in Madrid, mixed media focus, submissions, 5 original works plus artist statement. I hesitated. Then I uploaded them all. The broken skyline I painted after our first fight. The ink-blurred sketch of her asleep with her hand just inches from mine, not touching. The oil portrait, half finished, where her eyes stared at the viewer but didn't quite see. And finally, the charcoal piece I drew the night she forgot my birthday. Her face distorted, half light, half static, a ring on her finger but no reflection in her gaze. My artist's statement was just one line: "This is what silence looks like when it pretends to love you." I submitted at 2:37 a.m., closed the laptop, and sat there for a long time, listening to the shower start in the other room. She never asked what I was working on. 3 weeks passed like ghosts. She was busier than ever: events, shoots, brand meetings. Our meals turned into scroll sessions, our conversations into content cues. One morning, while pouring cereal into chipped bowls, I got the email. "We are thrilled to offer you a place in the International Artist Residency Program. Flight details attached, housing provided, start date, next month, duration, 6 months, one-way ticket, non-refundable." I stared at those words like they were written in fire. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs, not joy, not relief, just space. Later that night, she came home late, her heels echoing down the hallway like declarations. I waited in the living room, my sketchbook open on my lap, a page half drawn. She kissed my forehead like she always did when she was distracted. I told her, quietly. "I got accepted. It's in Madrid. I leave in 3 weeks." She blinked once, then smiled. Not with surprise, not with fear, but with ease. "Wow, that's amazing, babe. 6 months, right?" "Yeah, one way." She poured herself a drink. Her fingers twirled the glass slowly, eyes not meeting mine. "You'll come back better, right?" she asked. Better. As if I was broken. I nodded. But inside? I had already packed my bags. She wrapped her arms around me, briefly, then left to change her outfit for a campaign shoot. And I sat there in silence, watching the ice melt in her untouched glass. Later that night, I opened a new page in my sketchbook. I drew a plain window. Outside it, a blurry figure waved from the terminal. Inside, a hand holding a velvet ring box, closed, unopened, facing away. I didn't know if I was running toward something or away from her. All I knew was, this time, I was choosing me. And when she finally watched me leave, she still didn't ask what I was taking with me. 2 days before my flight, the city was raining again. Not the romantic kind. The kind that soaks through your shoes, clings to your skin, and makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I was coming back from printing my travel documents. My sketchbook sat in my lap, wrapped in a damp tote bag. The taxi's heater was humming softly, fogging up the glass. I wasn't thinking about her, not actively, not then. But fate, or cruelty, has a habit of placing her right in front of me the moment I try not to look. We stopped at a red light near the cafe where she used to write captions while pretending they were poems. I wasn't paying attention at first, just another blurred figure beneath an umbrella. Until she tilted her head back and laughed. That laugh. The same one she used to save for our stupid kitchen dance-offs, the kind we did barefoot with spaghetti still boiling behind us. Except it wasn't mine anymore. And she wasn't alone. He was standing too close. Tall, broad shoulders, hair styled like it had somewhere important to be. But it wasn't how he looked that gutted me, it was how she looked at him. Familiar, open. Like she'd already practiced this version of herself in a mirror and finally found the right partner for the scene. She reached up and brushed something off his sleeve, a gesture so soft, so intimate, I felt it scrape across my chest like broken glass. I didn't move, didn't blink. The taxi light turned green. The driver tapped the steering wheel. I wanted to tell him to wait. Just a moment longer, just so I could be sure it wasn't what it looked like. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. She wasn't cheating. No. She was laughing too hard for it to be guilt. There was no hiding, no secrecy, just joy, joy she no longer saved for me. I watched her walk away with him, under the same umbrella we once shared, the same one she left in the hallway, saying she didn't need it anymore. And I realized I had become a relic in her life, a background character to a story she was already rewriting without me. When I got home, I didn't speak. She was on the couch, editing a reel. She glanced up, smiled. "You okay?" I nodded. Because what else do you say when you've already disappeared in someone's eyes and they haven't noticed yet? Later that night, she asked if I wanted to take one last rooftop photo before I left. For memories, she said. I almost laughed. Instead, I told her I had a headache and locked myself in the study. I opened my sketchbook to a blank page, but my hands refused to draw her this time. So I drew the umbrella. Not the people, just the object. Half open, forgotten on a rainy bench. Next to it, I wrote, she didn't wait, she didn't even hesitate. It wasn't betrayal, not in the way people measure it. There were no lies, no confessions, no lipstick stains on shirts, just distance, unspoken, but undeniable. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from what's not said. From being left out of a laugh. From watching someone's heart walk away while they still sleep beside you. That night, she curled into me like nothing had changed, like she didn't just hand my place to someone else without even knowing it. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Only silence. And the slow, aching realization, I was never the ending. Just the placeholder, just the promise. Not the permanence. Essence. The alarm went off at 5:40 a.m., quiet enough not to wake her. I lay there for a second, eyes open, watching the ceiling catch the dim blue wash of morning light. It didn't feel like the last time, it just felt hollow. Beside me, she was curled up on her side, a soft hum coming from her phone screen, a video still playing, frozen on the frame of her own smiling face. She had fallen asleep mid-edit again. Even in dreams, she was inside her brand. I studied her one last time. Not the way strangers did, through glowing screens and perfect angles, but in raw stillness. Smudged eyeliner, loose strands of hair pressed against her cheek. One arm wrapped around her phone like it could keep her warm. I wanted to brush it away. I didn't. Instead, I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to shift the mattress. The suitcase was already packed. One-way ticket folded in the front pocket. The ring box stayed behind, buried deep in the drawer where it could sleep quietly without the weight of what it almost became. I stood in the doorway for a beat, waiting, for her to stir, for her to reach out in her sleep, for anything. But she didn't. Just soft breaths, steady and distant, as if she were dreaming in a world where I no longer existed. And maybe she already was. In the living room, I paused at the shelf, the one where we kept the books she swore she'd finish. There was one she always picked up and never got past chapter 3. The spine was barely cracked. I opened it and folded the note inside, tucking it between the pages. 4 words. I hope your promises keep you warm. I didn't sign it. She wouldn't need to read far to know who it came from. I zipped up my jacket, pulled my sketchbook from the coffee table, the only thing I truly wanted to carry with me, and stepped outside. The sky was still dark, a grey that looked like it hadn't made up its mind about sunrise yet. I didn't take a cab, I walked. All the way to the train station, suitcase trailing behind me like a shadow too tired to keep up. Every step felt like it weighed something, not just clothes or pencils or paper, but words. All the words I hadn't said. All the nights I bit my tongue because I didn't want to dim her shine. All the times I told myself this was just a phase, that love would catch up if I just kept waiting. But love shouldn't feel like standing in place while someone else runs toward the version of themselves that doesn't include you. At the airport, I sat by the gate with my hood up and headphones in, no music playing. I just needed the silence to sound like something other than loss. I thought about texting her, not a goodbye, just a dot, something small enough to carry the ache without making it a scene. But I didn't. She was probably already awake, replying to comments, planning another upload. By now, she'd glance over at my side of the bed and wonder where I went, maybe even text, "Did you go for coffee?" with a yawn. And maybe when she saw the empty closet, maybe when she saw the note, maybe when she finally opened that book for real. She'd feel the quiet I left behind. They called for boarding. I stood, exhaled, and stepped toward the gate. No dramatics, no cinematic turn. I didn't look back, not once. Because if I did, I might see her standing there. Not to stop me, but just to say, "Have a safe trip," and I wouldn't survive that. As I crossed through the terminal doors, I felt it, the weight of everything I never said falling behind me like luggage I no longer had hands to carry. I left nothing but a note, and a silence too loud to ignore. Madrid greeted me with rain. Not the soft kind I remembered from home. This rain was heavier, like the sky had too much to say and finally snapped. It struck the stone streets in rhythmic bursts, echoing through alleyways like heartbeats that hadn't learned how to slow down yet. For the first time in years, I woke up alone. Not because she had left early for a shoot or a brunch meeting or a brand call, but because she simply wasn't here. And maybe, for the first time, that made me feel something close to stillness. The apartment I'd been assigned was small, white-walled, filled with unfamiliar echoes. A single window overlooked an old plaza that smelled like wet leaves and burnt espresso. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. Because this time, I wasn't painting for her, or for the clicks, or the comments. I was painting for the silence. And the silence had finally begun to speak. Every morning, I filled a fresh cup of black coffee, bitter, unfiltered, honest, and opened my sketchbook. The pages soaked in everything I had buried for months. Shapes twisted in stormlight, faces that resembled hers but refused to stay still, eyes blurred in charcoal, mouths drawn open but saying nothing. One canvas cracked under the weight of a brush I pressed too hard. Another bled watercolor like the sky outside, gray and blue and lost. I painted a version of her I could mourn. Not the girl on screen, not the laugh that belonged to strangers, but the girl who once whispered to me under rooftops, who once called our silence safe. It hurt to remember her that way, but it hurt more to forget. I didn't check her socials, didn't scroll through her posts or watch her stories. I told myself I didn't care if she missed me. But I knew that wasn't true. I just didn't want to know the answer. Some nights, I could still hear her voice in the quiet, not as she was, but as she used to be. Softer, less rehearsed. The rain helped. It came often, like Madrid wanted to weep with me. I'd leave the window cracked just enough to hear it trickle down the glass. There was something holy about it, the way it touched everything, then disappeared, like she had. The residency program kept me busy. Critiques, studio visits, gallery prep. People asked about my pieces, the recurring figure with soft hair, the unfinished hands, the way I never drew her whole. One curator said, "There's a sadness in your work that feels unresolved." I smiled politely. Sadness doesn't resolve, it lingers, it lives in the white space you leave behind, and I left plenty. Every night, I finished one piece, and every night, I left one page blank in my sketchbook. Not from lack of ideas, but as a ritual. A page for the version of us that never happened. For the apology she never gave, for the goodbye she never earned, for the version of me that still believed love was enough. Some nights, I stared at that blank page longer than I did the others. Because even emptiness deserves to be witnessed. I think I understood then, that moving on wasn't about forgetting her, it was about remembering myself before her, the self who laughed without shrinking, who painted without explaining, who loved without disappearing. Rain fell again the night I finished the piece that would line my gallery. The studio lights buzzed overhead, my hands were stained with charcoal, my shirt ruined with paint. But the canvas in front of me, it was her, and it wasn't. A silhouette reaching out, not to be held, but to be let go. No caption, no hashtags, no ring on her finger, just the soft ache of almost. I signed it with a date, the date I left, not the day I met her. Because that was the moment I started becoming real again. And as I turned off the lights, rain tapping like fingertips across the glass, I whispered to no one, "Thank you for not waiting." The gallery lights felt like sunlight, warm and surreal on my skin. People surrounded me, murmuring in accented praise, champagne glasses chiming softly like applause from ghosts. The walls were filled with my work, sketches that bled regret, canvases that screamed in silence, color palettes that still remembered the way her laugh sounded under fluorescent lights, and in the center of it all, beneath a spotlight that never burned too hot, hung ghosted by a promise. A painting I nearly didn't finish, a painting I nearly didn't survive. It was simple, almost stark, a crushed silver ring split in two, its band fractured where the engraving should have been. And behind it, the faint silhouette of a plane taking off, the sky in the background streaked in lavender and ash. The curator said it was haunting. The art blog called it a brilliant metaphor for severed devotion. But to me, it was just the truth. I hadn't planned for it to be the centerpiece, but the moment they unwrapped it, everyone in the room went quiet, and that silence felt louder than anything she had ever said to me. Within 2 hours, my work sold out. Every single piece. Collectors left business cards, interviewers hovered. My mentor gave me a smile that meant, "You've finally arrived." I should have felt something, pride, joy, relief. But all I felt was stillness. Like I'd been holding my breath since the moment I gave her that ring, and only now, in a room full of strangers who didn't know her name, was I finally breathing. Then my phone buzzed, twice. And then again. I pulled it from my pocket, the screen lit up in bright white against the gallery's soft glow. Her name. Staring back at me like it belonged. A name I once whispered into pillows, a name I once wrote in the corners of sketchbooks. A name I hadn't said aloud in months, not because I forgot, but because forgetting is something you do with effort. She was calling. Now. On the day I was finally chosen. Not for my silence, not for my patience, but for my art, for my truth. My hands trembled. I could feel it, the old instinct, the one that always wanted to answer, to soften, to forgive before the apology even arrived. But I didn't pick up. Instead, I stared at the call until it stopped ringing. Then I opened my camera roll. Snapped a photo of the painting from across the room, the crushed ring, the plane lifting, the empty sky. And I sent it. No caption, no message, just the image. Let her draw her own conclusions, let her wonder what it meant, if it was about her, or us, or the verse, iron of love that she had commodified and tossed into a highlight reel. Because that was all I had left to give her. No explanations, only art, only memory, only wreckage made beautiful. A minute later, she replied. Not with words, but with a single heart emoji. And somehow, that broke me more than anything else could have. Because a heart was too easy, too curated, too late. I turned off my phone, slipped it into the inner pocket of my jacket, then stepped back into the light of the gallery. People were waiting to speak to me, to ask about the story behind the work. They didn't know the whole truth, but they didn't need to. Because in that room, for the first time in forever, I was no longer the background of someone else's dream. I was an artist, not the muse. And I no longer needed her permission to be seen. The interview was quiet. Clean. A white-walled studio, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of me, and one camera trained on my face, like it was trying to see through it. The journalist leaned forward. Her tone was soft, reverent, the way people speak when they think they're touching something sacred. Your recent collection stirred a lot of emotion online, especially Ghosted by a Promise. She paused. Tilted her head. Was the muse real? I blinked once. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because part of me wanted to lie. To protect her. To protect the version of us I had painted so carefully in silence. But I didn't. I looked at the lens, straight into it. She was. 2 words. And the whole world shifted. I didn't say her name, I didn't have to. The internet moved faster than breath. By the time I left the studio, the clip had already been clipped, subtitled, quoted. 1,000 hearts typed faster than logic, threading together timelines and TikToks, digging through old photos, untagged posts, unexplained captions. They found the promise ring post, the one where she never said my name. They found Ghosted by a Promise, matched the style to her silhouette, the timeline to our final months, the departure date to her birthday livestream, the one I wasn't in. They compared the sketchbook leaks with her Instagram carousels, they dug up everything she hadn't said, and then they turned. Suddenly, she wasn't the girl who was glowing, she was the girl who let someone like me leave, the girl who wore the ring but never named the hand that gave it. I heard she deleted a few posts that night. I didn't check myself, but my phone lit up with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some said, "You finally said it." Some said, "She's been quiet all day." One said simply, "She's spiraling." But I didn't respond, because I wasn't celebrating, because grief doesn't gloat. I never wanted revenge, just release, just to be allowed to let go without having to beg for acknowledgement. But now she couldn't look away. Now the silence she'd curated had turned into a mirror, and it reflected everything she refused to name. Later, I received a forwarded clip from a friend, a screen recording from one of her live streams, a QA she tried to host 2 days after the interview. She was smiling, but her eyes weren't. They asked about the painting. She ignored it the first time. They asked again, and she blinked, laughed too tightly, then whispered, "Sometimes people remember you in ways you don't deserve." Then she logged off, no goodbye, no outro, just a black screen and the ring still faintly visible on her hand before it cut out. That night, I reopened my sketchbook, flipped past the blank pages, the rain-washed sketches, the cracked self-portraits, and I drew her one last time. No filters, no perfect angles, just a girl in a dark room, holding a screen that no longer adored her. The glow is fading, the silence is finally catching up. And in the corner of the page, I wrote, "I never needed the world to know her name, only she did." The Madrid sky was soft that day, a pale stretch of cloud smeared with quiet gold, the kind of light that doesn't scream for attention but touches everything with a kind of truth. I had just finished cleaning brushes, the scent of linseed oil still on my fingertips, when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps, hesitant, familiar. When I opened the studio door, time folded in on itself. There she was. Standing beneath a borrowed umbrella, hair a little longer, eyes a little duller, but still dressed like someone who wanted the world to see her, even when she was breaking. We stood there, silence stretched between us like an unfinished sentence, and then her voice cracked through it. I didn't know what I had. Her hands trembled, gripping the umbrella too tightly. "I thought you'd always be there." I didn't speak, I just stepped aside. She crossed the threshold, slowly, like she was walking into a memory. The studio was small but filled with light. My canvases leaned against the walls like quiet witnesses. Some of her, most of her, had already been painted and erased, over and over again. She took it all in, her eyes darting from canvas to sketch, as if searching for something she recognized, but everything had changed, even me, especially me. "I saw the interview," she said after a while, her voice was low, breaking at the edges. I nodded. She looked at me, not with the confidence she used to wear like perfume, but with something closer to shame. "You never said my name." "I didn't need to," I said. And that hit her harder than I expected. She sat down on the edge of the old wooden stool I kept by the window, the same one I used to paint from, the same one I hadn't used since ghosted by a promise. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I kept the ring," she whispered. "I didn't ask why." She opened her bag and pulled out the book, the one I left behind. She hadn't touched it. The page was still marked where I had tucked the note. She handed it to me, silent, like a confession too heavy for words. I opened it. The note was still there, uncreased, unread. I held it up between us. "I was there," I said. Her lip trembled. I placed the book gently back in her hands. "But now I paint for myself." She looked down. And for the first time since she walked through that door, she didn't have anything to say. No explanations, no apologies rehearsed in perfect tone, just silence. And I didn't try to fill it, because some silences are necessary, some silences are earned. Outside, the rain had started again, not hard, not angry, just soft, like the sky had been holding its breath too long. She stood, turned to leave. Then paused in the doorway, umbrella still unopened. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the girl who once held my hand and then let go too slowly for it to count as breaking. "I miss who I thought you were," I said. And with that, she stepped into the rain. Didn't open the umbrella, didn't low. Okay back, and I let her go, this time for real, no blank pages, no promises, just brushstrokes, and rain. The final room of my solo exhibit is silent, not the cold, awkward kind of silence, but the kind that feels like it belongs, like the air itself is holding its breath. There's only one piece in the space. Centered under a dome of light, resting in glass, untouched by time or hands. A sculpture, no larger than a wine glass, silver twisted delicately around gold, looping in and out like two lives once entwined but never fused. Inside, suspended on a thread thinner than memory, hangs the ring. The real one, not the promise ring, not the one that went viral, the real ring, the one she never saw, the one I bought before the silence, before the airport, before the one-way ticket I never told her about it. It catches the light just right, and somehow, still gleams like it's waiting. I didn't name the piece, just gave it a plaque. Promises fade, art remains. Some people cry when they see it, they don't always know why. Others stand quietly, shoulders rising, lips tightening, eyes glassy but dry. And a few smile. Not out of joy, but recognition. Like they too, once gave something precious to someone who didn't understand what it cost. The gallery director once asked if I'd like to place a card explaining the piece, maybe a quote or a dedication. I shook my head. Because it was never about her. It was never even about the heartbreak. This final piece was about the version of myself that had to rise from it. The one who stopped painting for approval. Who stopped sketching apologies into margins. Who stopped waiting for closure that was never coming. I walk through the gallery sometimes during off hours, just to feel the space differently. The oil on the walls still smells faintly of linseed. My footsteps echo in the corners. But in that last room, the sound always disappears. People say it feels sacred. I suppose grief, when sculpted properly, can look like worship. The ring itself is untouched, encased in glass, a vow never spoken, a question never asked, frozen in the moment before, where hope lived, fragile and stupidly golden. She never saw it, she never had to. That was the point. Because if I had given it to her, it would have vanished into the noise. Another filter, another post, another promise turned into performance. But here, it's real. solid, unedited. The truth of it preserved in the absence of a name. I don't talk about her in interviews anymore. Not because I'm protecting her, but because I've finally stopped explaining myself to people who only showed up after the ending. Art has a way of holding space for things words can't survive. And in that final room, I left just enough space for what she threw away to become something lasting. Sometimes I'll stand by the entrance quietly, watching people react to the piece. Once, a girl barely older than 20 stared at it for 10 full minutes, then whispered to her friend, "He loved someone who didn't stay." The friend replied, "No, he loved someone who didn't choose him." They weren't wrong, but they also weren't quite right. Because she did choose me. Just not in the moments that mattered. She chose the version of me that stayed behind the lens, the placeholder, the silent one. But the man who sculpted this? He chose himself. He walked out of the frame, left the spotlight, took the ring meant for her and turned it into something no one could take. I don't know where she is now. Maybe she's still chasing applause, maybe she's finally alone with the silence she curated, maybe she's married, maybe she wears someone else's ring, but that no longer belongs to my story, because the ending wasn't her walking away, it was me not following, and that's what this piece is, a farewell, sealed in glass, no caption, no closure, just the truth, and on most days, that's more than enough.